now we will have Dr. Abdالوهاب المسيري with his remarks.
20 minutes. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Turani, for affording me this opportunity to speak in Washington, D.C., in the National Press Club here, and to participate in this very interesting panel. I heard what most of what Khalid had to say and what Gosh had to say, and basically I agree with, if not all, most of what they have said, and I will try to make my presentation complementary to what they have said. Of course, whatever I'm going to say is going to be tinged by my own personal experience. An Egyptian who got his PhD on American poetry here in the United States, and someone who has just finished his autobiography. This is inevitable that I grow every once in a while a bit autobiographical, and at times maybe lyrical. But one thing I learned here in this country, critical thinking. We learned how to distinguish between the subjective and the objective, between what is and what should be, and what is desirable to me and what is desirable to others. Classification is of the essence of rationalism. You cannot have a rational discourse with the other unless you classify. Categories become clear. However, the Arab-Israeli conflict, the discourse used in the West, violates all the dictates of the critical mind. I mean, when an Arab is told about the ancestral dreams of the Jews, or about the Judeo-Christian tradition, or the ancestral homeland, and about Jewish peoplehood, or about the Jewish question in East Europe in the 19th century, that leaves him quite cold, you know, because, okay, this is something that happened in the Western world, that is something of the beliefs of the Western world, and when someone tells me that he had left Palestine 3,000 years ago, and therefore he has the right to return, denying that right to me, I beg to differ there, and I say, all right, let us look at our categories of perception there. Let us look at the world outlook behind the discourse. I find the question, do you approve of suicide bombing or disapprove of it, is a bit irrelevant, because I don't think of any human being who would approve of suicide bombing as such and would see it as a desirable end in itself. So instead of seeking yes or no answer, as if we were in a multiple choice exams, which I hate profoundly. When I came here in this country in 1963, and I was given the first, and I had no idea of the objective multiple choice exams, and I would go in the room and they would give me a sheet, and I have yes or no, and I didn't know how to answer because the mature answer was something in between. So I wrote what I thought between, with the result that I failed abysmally. And they wanted me to study English for 2 more years. And I told them, no, give me the exam. I know now the gimmick. And I went in and like any higher ape, I just, and I got the highest mark. And they were shocked, and I told them there is something wrong with this kind of exam. So let us really look at the discourse and try to understand. Because here we are dealing with human beings who have motives. And when you study human conduct, you don't watch it from outside in a Pavlovian manner. You have to look from inside. The Western and media discourse has described it as suicide, has talked of terrorism, has referred to children used as human shield, and so on and so forth. Suicide is from Latin suicidere, that is to kill oneself, which means that at this point the motives of the actor become very, very important. I mean, why should someone terminate his life? especially if we know that suicide is not part of the Arab Islamic tradition. It's not like the harakiri or double suicide in the Japanese tradition and so on. The most nihilist of Arab thinkers never committed suicide. They went on living. Most nihilist poets wrote nihilist poems, but they never committed suicide. They went on getting married and eating and dying like normal human beings. Suicide is dictated by despair. But in the case of these young men, it's actually an expression of certain fullness, certain desire to transcend what is, to protest against it. So it is not a denial of selfhood, it's a fulfillment of selfhood. You might disagree with it, but you have to understand first. Understanding is essential. And understanding is essential because that's how we can find a solution. Islamic religion, and most of these suicide bombers are Muslims, prohibits suicide. Actually, there is more emphasis on suicide in the Zionist discourse. I mean, the Masada myth comes to mind, which is a suicidal myth, the Samson myth. And all of these are myths that are in the minds of young Israelis. When they graduate from a military academy, they go to Masada, and they swear that Masada will never be repeated again or something of that nature. But Masada is a central national myth, and it is a suicide myth. Even though the rabbis, in other words, the Orthodox tradition, of course, prohibits suicide. So let us ask, and as Max Weber suggested, we have, verstehen, understand from within, the motives. You see, his argument was that you cannot interview a chicken, but you can interview a human being. In other words, you can know the inner motives of a human being, and because that what dictates his conduct, and that is what gives the meaning to his conduct, and you cannot deny him that. We have two opposing outlooks here, the Zionist and the Arab or Islamic or whatever. Please let me here, as an aside, say, in trying to explain, I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm not asking for pity. I'm just asking for understanding. The moral judgment, the emotional judgment comes later, and every individual is entitled to his judgment. But right now, let us try to understand. The Zionist world outlook is predicated on very simple premises, that Palestine is not Palestine, actually. It's Eretz Israel. And that the Jews are not communities all over the world, that they are one people, ein Volk, to quote Herzl, who was heavily influenced by German romantic philosophy. And this folk is organically bound up with that land. And that they see that the drama of Jewish history could be acted out only in Eretz Yisrael, not outside. And therefore, they talk about the negation of the diaspora, that whatever happened, all achievements of the Jews outside Israel, outside Eretz Yisrael, are simply deviation from a quintessential Jewish history, and therefore they have to go back. This gives them, from a Zionist point of view, absolute rights. The rights of any original inhabitants is marginal. Actually, the early stages, actually till 19, or let's say till the Oslo Accord, Zionism was predicated that Palestine is a land without a people, that the Palestinians did not exist. I mean, and there are many statements. The most celebrated is Golda Meir's, when she said, the Palestinians are Jordanians, or why are the Palestinians asking for a state? They have one there in Jordan, and so on and so forth. And I can go on quoting, but this would be scholarly showiness, in a sense. In that sense, when a Jewish citizen of the United States living happily ever after in Washington, D.C., goes back to Palestine, he is not usurping the land or anything. He is just returning after a short period of absence of 2,000 or 3,000 years. Actually, that's what Begin told some of the socialists, Marxists in the Ein Harod kibbutz. Told them, listen, if this is Palestine and not Eretz Yisrael, then you are usurpers of the land. You are thieves and the criminals. This is Eretz Yisrael, and you have to believe in that. This is the essence, really, of the Zionist world outlook. It's a world outlook I think the Arabs, the Palestinians in particular, cannot accept. Let us now look at this young Palestinian who straps himself with bombs, and the two gentlemen here on the panel spoke about the present misery. Let us talk about the history of misery. Now, you might say history is irrelevant, but for an Arab it is not. We are still avid readers of history. We still live in the past, hoping that we can retrieve something from it that would help us enter the world of modernity, keeping our specificity. We still see the uses of history like most Western humanists, incidentally. It's only recently that Fukuyama declared the end of history. But when I was here in the States, till the 60s, history was talked of very reverently as something that could be used as a source of knowledge. Now, let us look at this Palestinian. He had heard of the Crusades before, where some troops came from Europe claiming that they are carrying the message of Christ, the Prince of Peace, and they came and murdered Jews and Muslims and even Arab Christians. They pillaged Byzantium, but all the time they were using a Christian discourse. So that really made him understand that there is a difference between the performance, the structure of violence emerging, and the discourse used to cover it up. Now, towards the end of the 19th century, he started seeing settlers coming from Russia. They called themselves Halotsim, pioneers. He called them Maskub, which is from the word Moscow. They are Muscovites, foreigners coming to settle there. And I think his appellation is much more scientific in a sense, because these were people who came, left their homeland, and came here to solve one of their problems, whereas the proper place for them to solve their problem is there, not here in his land. In 1917, Balfour Declaration talks of him as the non-Jewish communities, talks of 90% of the population as if they are marginal compared to the Jewish community, which constituted 10%, and incidentally, most of them were religious Jews who were there for religious purposes. They were not settlers. They were not, in that sense, Zionists. And the early Zionists had to fight against them, because these there were for religious reasons exclusively. Resistance started, demonstration started. And the Zionists knew from the very beginning, and I will be quoting later, that the project will not be readily accepted by the natives. And of course, the Zionists also knew their history. As Jabotinsky said, we do not know of any settlement project that was welcomed by the population. I mean, I always like the discourse of the Zionist right because it has certain clarity about it and certain transparency. It's the socialists who claim that they came to Palestine to set up the government of the working classes, or the liberals who said they came here to set up the government which would be an oasis of democracy, and that they will help the Arabs to develop and grow and so on. These are very soggy, sentimental apologetics that really do not stand the test of reality. The right-wing Zionists say we have come here to usurp the land, to take it. And we do not know of any people that would give up its land freely, easily. So Jabotinsky suggested an iron wall. There has to be an iron wall against those till they get tired, till they know that the settlers are not leaving, till we generate in them despair. It is then that they will come to negotiate with us. 1936 saw the longest movement of civil disobedience in history. At that time, the Palestinians had few Ottoman guns and so on. They would come down from the mountains, shoot at Zionist settlers and at, you see, settlers, are they civilians or not? This is a question I will raise later, and British soldiers, and they would get killed. Actually, I met one of the followers of Izz al-Qassam in a certain funeral, and he said that every night we would take our Ottoman guns and we go down to shoot and get shot, murder them. And I told him why. He said so that nobody would forget the land. Nobody would forget our homeland. In other words, from the very beginning, they knew that they might have to give in, they might surrender, but they will never give up, that it will continue. Then the Arabs were told about the Holocaust, that they are being persecuted in Germany, and therefore we'll give them Palestine. I mean, the Western discourse is so subjective in a sense that imagine a Palestinian peasant sitting and someone comes tell him that you will have to leave your field because, you know, Hitler killed Jews out there. The Bedouin king, Saud, Ibn Saud, told President Roosevelt, so why don't you give them a part of Germany then? Which is common sense in a sense, but I mean, it makes sense, much more than transferring European population to Palestine and settle them there. Now, in 1948, the Zionist state, which claims to be Jewish, was declared, and the massive transfer of population took place. Of course, there were Zionist apologetics, but the transfer is inevitable. How could you set up a Jewish state with an Arab majority? I mean, that's what the demographic Zionists, there I got the last warning, okay. And there are writings among, when you see at the beginning, the Zionist discourse was very transparent. So they saw transfer coming. Even Herzl, who was a liberal, talked when he was considering Cyprus for settlement. He said the Arabs, Greeks, and the mixed multitude of the East would be transferred. So that the Palestinian was transferred is simply a structural result of the idea of a purely Jewish state. And that's why when they were transferred, when they were expelled, Weizmann talked of the miraculous cleansing of the land, a very ominous term that reminds one of later cleansings elsewhere. Now, one UN resolution after the other was issued, including repatriation, including this and that, and nothing doing. As Golda Meir said, UN resolution is not worth one bullet. And unfortunately, so far she's right. Now, the whole world sees, especially the secular Western world that believes in separation of church and state, sees a Jewish state that talks of the ingathering of the exiles, that talks of its Jewishness, that ingathers 1 million Soviet Jews the last few years, and that denies the Palestinian young man the right to, even though he is clutching at the key of his house in Haifa up to now. And he does not, and this is his hope, that one day he will go back. Now, if you are that angry, like me, I write books and write poems, but for a young man who does not write books and who does not write poems, what does he do? They usually take up arms against a sea of troubles, and am I opposing them, end them, hopefully. Now, the issue of that the Palestinians or the suicide bombers should not shoot at civilians. Of course, I wholeheartedly agree with that. But are settler colonialists, and that's how we view them, civilians or not? This is an issue that needs to be discussed. Here I am. A human bloc came, not just an army. A human bloc came and took up the land. What do? Do I keep on looking for a soldier to shoot at him? Supposing I don't find, and I still find the human bloc there, expanding, growing, so on. Do I look at it objectively and this and that? I don't expect that from an angry young man who lost everything, even though I might disapprove of it. But I'm positing it in the form of a question for you to ponder. You see, there was a Zionist when the Zionist cause was still transparent, who said, this is not terrorism. He's talking about the attacks of the Arabs. He said, this is not terrorism. It's a national war, meaning national liberation war. Terrorism is just one way of waging this war against those who usurp their land. And if we finish off one generation, another generation will come. Their movement might be primitive, but not devoid of idealism and self-sacrifice. He goes on. And when we say they started the aggression, we mention half the truth. From a political point of view, we are the aggressors. The land is theirs. They are living in it. We come to take it from them. This Zionist spokesman happens to be Ben Gurion in 1939 in a Zionist conference. Now, let me conclude with this. Someone wrote to Herzl when he was about to set up the Jewish state, hatched the idea, told him, you are like, and he kept on claiming that he will take care of the Arabs are nice, this and that, they will leave their land voluntarily, and those who will wait, will stay, will civilize them, etc. He told him, you want to make an omelette without breaking the eggs. Now, then in another movie, because actually the main work of the Jewish state by Herzl was initially a novel, and it became a treatise for the Zionists. Now, there was a film, I think, Diane Keaton's Little Drummer Girl, where a newspaperman asks the Palestinian quote-unquote terrorist, aren't you ashamed of yourself to carry an egg basket in a market full of dynamite, put it among women and children? He said, I'm perfectly willing to trade my basket for your tanks and planes. And this is a question that poses itself to all of us. Thank you so much.